we're very pleased to have with us Nadia Sami today, who's a lawyer at Juripop, who's one of our partners at Piste. And we've invited Juripop in April last year, actually, to come to our AGM forum, for those who were there, to present their free, confidential, independent helpline for those who are either victims or have witnessed harassment in their workplace in the cultural sector. So now, I guess, in the midst of all these wave of denunciations that are taking place, we thought it would be a good idea to invite them again to speak to the Circus community. So thank you so much, Nadia, for accepting this invitation. We know we're very busy at the moment, so it's much appreciated. So Nadia's going to do a presentation that's going to be followed by a short Q&A. We've just done a similar webinar in French, and actually it worked quite well, I think, in the way it was. So just feel free to ask questions through the Q&A. So if you look at the bottom of your screen, you have a Q&A. So you can write your question there throughout the presentation in relation to the slides if you have a specific question. And then Nadia can interrupt herself and try to answer the question as she goes along. You can even, if you want to stay anonymous, we're not going to say any names, but if you want to say anonymous, there's a box that you can tick as well. And at the end also there will be a time to ask questions. You can ask questions verbally if you wish, but just be aware that the webinar is being recorded. So if you want to ask a verbal question at the end, you can raise your hand. Again, you have the option at the bottom of your screen, and then I'll see that you've raised your hand, and I'll let you speak at that time. So I think I've said everything, so I'm gonna leave it with Nadia, who's gonna start the presentation.
Thank you. Thanks, Nathalie. Thanks for having us. Hi, everybody. My name is Nadia Sami. I am a lawyer at Juripop, specifically a lawyer also at La Piste. I also have my private practice in labor law, where it is more or less geared on dismissals and harassment in the workplace, whether it's sexual or psychological, and also discrimination in general in the workplace. And in Juripop, I also participated giving conferences or workshops of harassment in the workplace. It's actually a program that is funded by the Commission des Normes. So we give it freely to people to raise awareness. So I'm very happy to be here today because we're going to talk about, you know, the hot topic these days, whether it's on social media or in the media in general. And I'll be very pleased to answer your questions. So as Nathalie said, we're gonna leave some time at the end for questions and answer. However, if you have questions throughout the topics, please don't hesitate to ask them. They're probably being asked by other people, and so they are appreciated when they're asked. And especially that we're going to talk about some concepts and notions that might be particularly maybe ambiguous, since they are actually illegal ones, so don't hesitate to ask. Actually, we're gonna start by just talking about La Piste. We are a one-stop shop. Actually, it's an access for everyone. Just to give you an idea of the context itself. One moment. Okay, so the context itself, it started in 2017 with the Me Too movement, where there was going public or an active denunciation regarding against harassment, sexual violence in the entertainment industry and the art and cultural industry. So at that time, more than 40 associations got together and grouped themselves to actually make an action plan of, okay, this is the situation. People are going out and they are actually disclosing what they have been carrying on themselves the burden to keep that all these years or throughout their workplace, and it has been very tough for them. So what is the action plan that we're going to do? And they actually set a plan where they actually thought that, you know, we could raise awareness by doing some workshops. We can actually set in place some regulations and rules in the policy so that it could help people submit their claims and see how it's going to be managed. And also, well, we can have like a one-stop shop where we could give legal advice. We could have legal advice for the community and provide this legal advice free of charge, as well as confidentiality that is preserved in giving that information. So they gave the mandate to Juripop, and actually La Piste is part of Juripop. So it is an aspect or a department in Juripop that handles actually all inquiries about harassment or sexual violence in the workplace, in the cultural and arts industry. So that was the context in 2017. In 2020, it has become again an issue. So as of the 5th of July, we started to see all the acts of denunciation again on social media and through the media itself. As well, to actually say that, okay, we need to be heard. There's obviously not enough that has been done, and we are still being victims of this in the arts and cultural community. We are affected. So we saw like a surge in posts on Instagram, on Facebook, on the media groups in general, and several tools actually were used from the social media to actually go public and tell the people, okay, listen, we are going through this. There are some harassers who are actually, their names actually come up within several, with several victims at the same time. We have also some acts that have been going on for several years, but nobody has been able to talk about them for different reasons. And the purpose of the denunciation is actually to respond to that urgent need, to a need to be heard, to be listened, to get support, and to actually prevent it from happening. So hence the idea of, you know, gathering today and talking about the topic and talking about specific issues and risks, etc. There has been some topics that, you know, like has been raised. Okay, well, you know, within the whole going out theme of, we've been hearing some words like defamation. We've been hearing some words like, oh, okay, damage of reputation. What does that mean? What does that imply? Tampering with testimonies, what does that mean? That means I cannot share my testimonies with other people who have lived the same thing or not. So there are a lot of questions regarding this, mostly how to handle that case. What am I supposed to do? What are my options? So hopefully we'll be able to answer these topics, and La Piste is here to help with that. I just want to tell you that it's, of course, this harassment in the workplace is actually, or sexual assault is actually a very lengthy topic. However, what we will do is, like, we're going to do today a bird's eye view, since we are only limited in time, but feel free that whenever you have even specific questions for you to actually call us, we're here for that. Call us at La Piste. So just to go through the topics that we were talking about today, we'll give you an idea of our mandate and services, who we assist, also talk about a few concepts on harassment, talking about the fact that people went public on social media and what would be the risks to that. We'll talk also about legal remedies, so, you know, taking the judicial path, but also we'll talk about alternative methods, because not everybody wants to go to through the judicial process. And so there are alternative measures for that and methods too. So we're going to also talk about some tools and resources that are on the market on the subject, and how we as La Piste, how we can help. And we'll leave some time for questions. So our mandate at La Piste, we've been funded by the Ministry of Culture to give the services that we give legal services. We accompany people and give legal advice. Our advice is free, it is totally confidential, and it's also independent. That means that regardless of your affiliation, even if the person is, for example, an employee of the Ministry of Culture, they can also come to us and expect a neutral and objective service. So regardless of whatever association is funding l'aparté, we are independent. And that is very important to know, that we are not biased in giving any information or any advice. We are giving it because that person becomes our client, and we are lawyers, so we are bound by the attorney-client privilege, which means that we have to keep things in secrecy and we have to preserve that. It is a legal obligation in our code of ethics. We offer the assistance to anybody working in the cultural industry or the arts field. So it could be actors, it could be singers, it could be a cameraman, it could be makeup artists, it could be dancers, it could be you guys, it could be anybody who works in the cultural and art industry. So it could be the victim himself or herself and the witnesses as well. So sometimes the people call us and they say, listen, I didn't live the situation per se, but I actually see my colleagues that they're going through a difficult situation. What can I do? What can I do to help them? And so we offer our services to victims and witnesses. However, we do not offer the services to the people who are accused of the act. So the alleged harasser. So even if the person is allegedly the harasser, we do not offer because of reasons of conflict of interest. So we actually refer them to another organization for that. But our main mandate is to actually help victims and witnesses. We inform the persons about their right and legal options, and it's up to them to say, it's up to the person himself or herself to say, okay, I'm going to go forward or I'm not going to go forward. But at least when they take their decision, they take it on an informed basis, and they know that, okay, I had the options, but I just don't want to take that path. And within giving the options, we actually give, you know, a practical sense of what is going on. We are practicing lawyers, so we can tell, you know, what delays it impacts and what costs is involved, and what is the practical process in doing that. So sometimes people ask us for external resources, whether psychosocial resources or other, and we have a network of organizations that we can refer people to. We do not, for example, represent in court. We do not do any representation. So it's really accompanying the people throughout, giving them the legal options that they have, or if they are representing themselves in front of courts or in front of administrative institution, we actually accompany them in terms of helping them write the processes, help them write the complaint, redraft certain issues, or assist in, for example, a mediation session, or assist in a session with their employer, for example, if they feel intimidated of being in the same room with the harasser and with the employer being involved. So we actually assist in these kinds of sessions and meetings. So who we actually serve, sometimes there's confusion on who we serve, but as I said, it's anybody who is in the cultural industry. So sometimes there's confusion about, okay, maybe it's only actors, or maybe it's you know, like I worked in the industry as for example a painter, I just painted a set. Well, no, you can have actually access to our services. It has to be something that is related to the workplace, for example. So if somebody is calling us because of harassment, because of domestic violence, for example, it wouldn't be associated with the workplace. We'd actually refer to another service that we have, maybe in Juripop or in another organization. But for us, it has to be a harassment or sexual assault within the workplace. So as I said, we do it to victims and witnesses, and regardless of their profession or affiliation. So whether they are affiliated to a union or not, or an association, it doesn't make any difference. And we give an example, for example, an actress or anybody of you know, the community that I mentioned to you, who repeatedly suffer, for example, from sexual advances on a film set, or on I don't know, maybe a studio or a dancing studios. So it could be a variety of reasons. A few concepts that I would like to clarify with you guys, so that you guys can have actually a grasp of what exactly some of the legal concepts that are maybe used within the media. What do they mean? What is the implication of that? So we're going to talk about what is psychological or sexual harassment. What does it implicate? And when does harassment become criminal? So when does can the police get involved, and what are the elements of sexual assault? So we can actually give a certain idea of that, just to give you a taste of what it is and be able to clarify some legal concepts. What it is? Well, actually, the psychological harassment is defined in the labor standard law. There has to be 5 elements for it to be psychological harassment. There has to be 5 elements in that. Just to give you an idea, it can be, for example, denigrating a person, so using the words, or giving, isolating a person in a way that, you know, like you're spreading rumors against them, and you don't want them to get involved because you want to make them feel incompetent or break them. So it could be psychological harassment. So what is it? It has to have 5 elements in them. It has to be a vexatious behavior that is done repetitiously, or it could be just once, but it has to be as flagrant or persisting in time. It has to be hostile, which means it's unwanted, so people do not like it, or a reasonable person wouldn't like it. It has to affect the employee's dignity or physical integrity, which means that it has to hurt them. It has to be humiliating, for example, and it results in a harmful work environment. So these 5 elements have to be there. The person who is deciding whether it's psychological harassment or not has to have these 5 elements together. It is very difficult sometimes to say, okay, what is vexatious? Maybe what is hurtful for you is not hurtful for me. So we look at the concept that's called reasonable person, and we look into it together to see, well, whether it has been, for example, just management taking decisions or bad decisions, or is it just a conflict of personality, or is it really psychological harassment? And when people call us in l'aparté, sometimes they're torn between, I don't know whether I'm oversensitive, or is it just because, you know, I didn't say no, or is it I'm really going through something bad, or sometimes they just feel that they are under a psychological harassment situation, but it's not. It's maybe a conflict of personality, and maybe it's not repetitious. So we look at the 5 elements together in order to decide. Oh, I think we have a question here. Let me just take it because maybe it's related to this topic. This might have been addressed in the French seminar already, but there is a circus company here in Montreal proposing to have a meeting with people who feel they've been harassed, assaulted by a particular company member who is currently suspended while they investigate. The proposal was to do this investigation meeting with victims, with a judge acting as a mediator. Do people need to be careful about entering into the mediated meeting process with the company if they want to reserve the right to potentially pursue legal action later on? Actually, it's a very good question. It depends on what the policy is and what is actually being stated within the mandate of the mediation. So sometimes in the mediation, there's a contract that is set. It's a very good question that you need to ask to the institution who has actually organized the mediation, how it's going to be organized. Sometimes when it's organized by a judge or a lawyer, there is certain privileges that it cannot be shared afterwards in a legal context, in a judicial context, and sometimes it is shared. There's a lot of factors that go into that. However, since there is a legal person involved, you might want to ask that question beforehand to get some answers about this, just to make sure that what you say or what you give as evidence will be used or is not going to be used afterwards, and take the necessary precautions for that with, like, for example, if you have to sign a non-disclosure agreement or whatever. So you need to take care of that, but it's a very good question because a lot of people can fall into that trap where, for example, there are contradictions in declarations, or, you know, you give a certain declaration, but it's incomplete, and then it can be taken against you. So it's good to ask that question beforehand and get an answer for it. What if my assault began before the Me Too movement? There is no problem. So if the assault actually happened before, you can actually you can call us, and we can look into what kind of assault. Is it an assault? Is it a sexual harassment? And we can look into it together. If, for example, it's sexual harassment within the workplace, and if we're talking about an employee, now I don't have enough information about the case, but if we're talking about employees, there's a statute of limitation of 2 years. So if it's before the Me Too movement, we might have some questioning about that. But if it's a sexual assault, then in that case, it wouldn't have a statute of limitation, and therefore we need to look into the matter and see what it is, what it qualifies for. Just to give you an example of psychological harassment that we've seen in courts, it's humiliating a person repeatedly in front of his colleagues, saying she is incompetent, cannot do anything properly, he can't even write, he's stupid, looks like a monkey, and she should talk to me as if I was his or her boss. So in terms of, okay, and in a situation where they're both equal, but one of them feels superior than the other. So we've seen that in courts, and it might be one of the reasons why we're talking about psychological harassment. Now, sexual harassment is a definition that's very close to that. So we're talking about unwanted sexual behavior, either words, gestures, postures with a sexual connotation manifested repeatedly. It can be also once, but it can be really, if it's flagrant and it goes in time, it has an impact. Well, in that case, it can be also considered as sexual harassment. For example, a sexual, for example, where it has actually harmed the person's dignity and the person actually doesn't want to go to work, or actually wants to leave her whole career because of what happened. So it might be this. There's a myth around this where people think that it's only touching or only saying certain words, but it can actually be like a whistle, it could actually be a gesture, and it could be sexual connotation, for example, like showing pornographic pictures or posting them in the workplace. It can be actually considered as sexual harassment, and it has, like psychological harassment with the 5 elements we've mentioned, it has an adverse consequence on the victim. When does it become criminal harassment? Well, as soon as the person fears for their safety, whether it's physical, emotional, or psychological, well, that it can be a criminal harassment where police can be actually contacted. For example, we say following someone repeatedly, very closely, constantly attempting to get in touch with someone and monitoring the places where they go, and behaving in a threatening manner towards someone. Well, a person fears for their integrity, they fear for their safety. Well, in that case, it could be criminal harassment. Extortion is a criminal act as well. It's when we start bargaining with a person and tell them, if you don't do this, I'm going to do that. So if you don't sleep with me, I will post pictures, compromising pictures on social media. So threatening the person to do that, threatening to divulge some facts about their private life, or make a person actually fear their job to do something. That could be considered as extortion and is a criminal act. Sexual assault, in another hand, it's a grave matter. So it's it's a sexual act that doesn't have to be a physical contact. It could be a physical contact or without physical contact to an individual without the consent of the person. And the consent is a very, very large area as well, because there are myths regarding the consent as well. Okay, when did the person say yes, or how the person says yes? There is a kind of like an expression going on that if it's not yes, it's no. But also if the person didn't say yes, it's actually no too. So there is a misconception about that, and also there is a misconception about, okay, well, maybe the person was okay with the act at the beginning but then changed their mind. That's okay too. And if the other person continues on going further with a sexual act, well, it becomes a sexual assault. So the question that is being asked generally is, okay, I experienced a situation of violence. I don't want to file a complaint, but I want to report my aggressor on the internet. Can I? That's $1 million question. Can I do that? And how can I do that? So we get a lot of questions you can imagine this time with all the phone calls that we're getting at La Piste is that question. Okay, how do I protect myself? What do I do? I've heard this and that. What do I do? Let me take a few questions before we go to answering that. How should I react when someone I know has been accused of sexual harassment, but it hasn't been proven? Do I need to pick a side in the situation? Can I leave it up to the legal system, HR department, and/or trained administrators to determine whether a crime or policy violation has taken place? Is it my responsibility or role to determine if a crime has taken place? It's a very good question, but because as I say, witnesses, they're very important, the dynamic actually of the harassment, because sometimes the person, the victim themselves, they don't have the energy or they don't have a clear mind to actually go public or divulge or think about what legal remedies they can take. So it's actually very good to advise them. What I would say at the beginning is to advise them to come to La Piste and advise them. So if they're in the cultural community, to actually call us or actually call an organization specialized in that. If they're not from the cultural community, you do not have an obligation as a witness. You have a moral obligation, okay? And let's differentiate between, I mean, the workplace and the non-workplace. So if it's a colleague that you want to advise, yes, you can, but you have a moral obligation. You will not have, let's say, a lawsuit against you saying, okay, why didn't you actually do something, or why didn't you take concrete steps? So this, you don't have to worry about that, but what you can do to help the situation, to help in the situation, to help the people, is ask them to contact us. If you know some of the procedures, the internal procedures inside of the company, you can actually refer them to the policy against sexual harassment and psychological harassment. That can help too. But sometimes there are a lot of implications involved, and maybe the person, depending on the situation, they are under fear. So to call us would be a very good idea to give them legal advice about their situation. What if the person who assaulted me was a teacher rather than an employer? Absolutely. Teachers are like employers to their organization. So let's say a teacher who works in a university or work in an educational institution, well, they are considered employees. The law actually makes them abide by the sexual harassment or the psychological harassment rules in labor law, and also their internal policy is also, they're also subject to that. So it's the same thing, it's the same process. So they need to look at the policy, what it says. If they don't trust the policy, or if the situation, sometimes they just, in some institutions, the complaint is actually maybe dealt with in a committee, and that person, that teacher is in that committee, well, in that case, they might have alternative remedies and maybe go outside the institution to preserve their rights. So it really depends on the situation. How should I react when someone I know has been accused of sexual harassment, but it hasn't been proven? Oh, I'm sorry, I read that. I think I went through the. Yeah, I think I went through the question. Just regarding the question, who said, well, if I've been witnessing the situation, what do I have an obligation, and do I have to pick sides? You don't have to pick sides, but it's important as a witness also not to minimize the situation for the victim, to just make sure that you don't say words like, oh, that's normal, or you're overreacting. It's important to be there for the victim, because for the victim to say that, to actually go out and divulge it, even to a friend, it's actually very difficult. They went through different phases to actually come out and say it. So it's very important in that regards to not to minimize the situation, because we've seen that it actually harms the victim a lot. I'm going to proceed with the presentation. Why do people go public on social media? So in order to answer the question, well, we've seen a lot of responses. Okay, why do you go public? Why don't you take legal remedies? Well, it's very easy to say. Some people fear of retaliation. They're working someplace or they're a student in some place and they don't want to be harmed later on within other years of their education. There's a lack of energy from people too, you know, like they don't want to go through the judicial criminals process, and it's lengthy, and it's cost also. There's cost. There's also a myth regarding, oh well, it happened a long time ago. There might be some statute of limitations, so it expired and I can't really go further. So there is a myth regarding that because it's not necessarily the issue. And as I can see from your questions, a lot of people are asking, oh, well, what if it's before the Me Too movement? What if it's a long time ago? And that is actually a very good question. It's a very good, and it's a concern because people don't know what the law says about it. And that's why we're here. There's lack of support. People feel, you know, like they feel alone. And so, okay, so they want to go through a system that maybe that can help. They hope of, there's a hope of preventing future abuse. They don't want this to happen to anybody else. So they go public so that it can be prevented and they can be heard. And they hope of changing the culture of rape that is installed. So they want to change the culture of, oh, well, he's just a guy. Oh, well, roll with the punches. And sometimes the people need peer support because it makes a lot of relief. It gives relief to people when they know that they're not alone, and that, you know, like when they say like, oh, I've been through this situation and other people have been through the same situation, it is a big relief and people feel comfort in that. However, this does come actually with risks. What are the risks regarding that? It's what we've been hearing about, the defamation lawsuit. Defamation lawsuit has been something that people have been talking about, saying like, oh, well, don't go public because of the defamation lawsuit, which means that the person can, the alleged harasser can actually feel that, okay, you went public, you ruined his or her reputation, and so they come back at you with a lawsuit. That's called a defamation lawsuit. It's when an individual actually tarnishes somebody's reputation, but either by words or by writing. There are actually two ways of actually putting that. One is the person is in bad faith and they seek to harm or humiliate to expose the other person, so they can be at risk for that. Or the person has no intention to harm, they're telling the truth, but because of their negligence and recklessness of how they said the situation and identified the person and ruined the person's, for example, and actually damaged the person in a certain way that nobody wants to hire that person, or their contracts that that person lost, well, it comes back at them by a lawsuit. And it can be pretty salty. It can be pretty salty at the defamation lawsuit, and it can be lengthy also at court. And but it's a risk. So when you are actually going public, you have to bear in mind that this is a risk. I'm not saying that it's guaranteed that the person would come back with that, but it is just a risk that you have to know that knowingly, if you're going through that, well, there is a risk that might happen. So, and there is a myth about saying that, okay, well, if I'm telling the truth, I won't have a defamation lawsuit. No, even if you're telling the truth and you say it in a certain way, well, that could cause a defamation lawsuit. Doesn't mean that the person is going to win it. It doesn't mean that it's going to be filed, but it's just a risk. And that's why lawyers are here to tell you, take it with a risk that you know. What is the means of defense if somebody files a defamation lawsuit against you? Well, you could say, well, okay, well, it's freedom of expression. We normally see that in court. You know, it's a freedom of expression, freedom of speech. Also, we see that a lot of people say, well, it was for the public interest. And that is a means of defense in defamation. You know, like, I wanted to protect the people around me. And so it depends on how you're going to prove it in court. And just to make sure that, you know, like, it's clear, public interest does not mean that it has to be across Canada from coast to coast. Public interest can be even if in a small community, for example, the Circus community, or it can be like a university community. So whatever any arts community that is there. So it could be there, and it's one of the means of defense. Now, whether you'll be able to do that, to prove that or not, it's another risk, and you have to have like means to go through that in front of court. It's important to keep in mind that going public with a story, there is a risk of the defamation, and the question to ask yourself actually before you go public is, okay, am I ready to defend myself? Not just financially, but also psychologically and emotionally, whether you're up to it or not. Let me see if there's other questions. Okay. Are there limitations to your services in regard to location, i.e. La Piste, Juripop Services Limited, or Canadian residents, those working with Quebec or Canadian companies? What happens when harassment was done in another province or country? Are the legal rights and obligations you're outlining based on Quebec Civil Code and Canada federal law? Absolutely. Let me start it from the end. Yes, it's actually, we are lawyers in Quebec, so we're actually giving advice. We're only allowed to give advice in the Quebec province, and obviously Canadian laws too, because the criminal code is actually part of the federal Canadian law. If the case or the incident happened in another province, well, it would be actually filed in another province. Some actually can be refiled here if, for example, the two persons were just there for, or the persons involved were just there for a certain period of time. Well, in that case, they can actually, when they come back, they can file it here, but they have to file the report there. It depends on what the incident is. If it's an incident, for example, for labor law, they can actually file it here. But if it's a criminal offense, well, they have to file it in the province. For people who are outside the country, we've gotten that question today within the last seminar, and we get it often, which is, okay, what if it's in another country? Because some people, they actually go to make shows, you know, throughout the world. So what we say is that it's important to file a report in the country itself, okay? We cannot give advice, of course, if, for example, it's in France, or if it's in another country, wouldn't be, because we don't know what the law is applicable, what the applicable law is, what are the implications. But we say file a report there, and then go to the embassy. Go to your embassy, go to the Canadian embassy, and what they can do is that they can make a link between the police over there and as well the police over here. They can actually act as a link, and they're very helpful. So look at your local consulate and your local Canadian embassy for help. In that event, it helps a lot of people, and it can be a solution. Another risk of actually that we've been seeing with, you know, like groups of people making groups together, making whether private groups or social media groups, is the tampering of testimonies. It's important to know that when you are in court, it's important to have your own testimony. It actually helps in your credibility. How it works is that when you are in front of a judge, the judge actually asks you questions and wants to see your reactions. And actually there has to be a certain spontaneity, and you have your own vocabulary in answering the judge. And so your credibility is built on that. Unfortunately, when people share their stories too much, they start taking each other's vocabulary and forgetting their own story. And so it affects their credibility in front of the judge as well. Also, the defense has what we call the evidence of similar facts, where having actually compared notes too much together with a lot of details can actually hinder the right to put the evidence of similar facts, which like show a certain pattern. Because sometimes in groups of people, what we find is that the harasser actually used the same modus operandi. They use the same pattern. They start talking to people by sending a text and then seeing what happens, and then going in and testing their limits, and then talking over the phone, and then suggesting certain things. And it's the same pattern. So it's important when it's a group of people for the Crown, the prosecutor, to actually put that into evidence. But when people have compared their notes too much, that's a big risk. So what should we do? Well, what you say is that you just don't give information, and you actually tell people to call it La Piste, and then we form the groups, and we, in a certain way, we want to preserve the testimonies, we want to preserve people's credibility if they want to go into criminal justice later on. And so we know how to manage that as lawyers. So I would actually, what I would advise is actually to stop sharing that information and actually talking to La Piste. So going into details can actually harm along the road. We've seen in the Rozon, Gilbert Rozon case, some actually files have been closed because of that, because people share too much information together. Possible legal remedies. Actually, legal remedies can be a variety of ones, depending on the situation, depending on your status at work. So you might, if for example the person is actually an employee, they can go to the Commission des normes de l'équité de la santé, sécurité au travail. I'm just saying the word in French because like you might know that, you might listen to that word. So it's the CNESST. What it is, it's the Commission of Standard Equity, Health and Security in the Workplace. I actually wrote that down so that I could give you like an idea what it is. So you actually can file a complaint for harassment over there in the workplace, or if, for example, people who have had employees who have had occupational health and safety division, they can, occupationally health issues, for example, a nervous breakdown, or for example, a psychological harm in a certain case, well, they can actually file the complaint for occupational health and safety division in front of that. And it's always better to talk to a lawyer because there are very limited time frames for that. Like for example, for the occupational health, it's 6 months. For the claims of the Commission for harassment, it's up to 2 years. So people need to be aware of that. There's also a claim at what we call the indemnisation des victimes d'actes criminels. So this is the this is the compensation for crime victims. It's an act that actually gives compensation for people within a certain criteria and certain eligibility, that actually gives a certain compensation to for health issues and also for what happened to the person. Also, if people actually, they suffer from a situation of discrimination against their age, their social status, their ethnicity, their color, whatsoever, they can actually file a complaint to what we call the Commission des droits de la personne et droits de la jeunesse, which is the Human and Youth Rights Commission. And it's actually a complaint that can be filed if ever this happened to you. You can file it. It's free, and it's made online. And we also accompany people in drafting that complaint and putting that out to the commission. It also takes time. It takes delays, but I mean, it's one of the means of legal remedies as well. If actually the person wants to punish the aggressor, wants to see like a certain repercussion, going to prison or paying a penalty or whatever, well, in that case, it has to be through the reporting to the police, and it's actually going to take its process in the criminal justice system, where the Crown will actually be taking over the case and then looking and making some kinds of investigation and doing the witness and declaration gatherings. So these are legal remedies. But I'm going to tell you something. A lot of people who come to us, they actually don't want that. You know, like, first of all, everybody wants that to stop. Like, I've had this in all the phone calls and all my files where people say, you know what, I just want this to stop. I want the harassment to stop, first of all. And then not all people want to go, you know, like for war, into a judicial war or whatever. They want to actually make it stop and maybe find other alternatives. Like, you know, some people just want an excuse. So it depends on what you want. You know, like, we talk to you about legal remedies, absolutely, but it's up to you. It's up to the individual to say, no, I want to go further with this, or I don't want to go further with that. Let's see if we have any questions from your side. So somebody says, I went public about a man who assaulted me, and the assault had about 6 witnesses. After going public, I got a lot of Me Too's from women in the community, and also some people calling me a liar. Can you still sue me even though I am not the only one and people saw my assault? Very good question too. It's all in the elements of defamation, which is a lot of elements in it. We have to look at the case with you. Look at the case. What has been said? What are the declarations? Who have you said it to? What is the context? Did you want to, you know, like, as we said, serve public interest? So whether he accuses you of a liar or not, I'm going to tell you, a lot of people just deny. And it doesn't mean that what you said is a lie. So we actually can look with you into the situation and say, okay, what would be the repercussions for that? What about non-Canadian artists receiving harassments in Canada? We actually serve everybody on the soil of Quebec, if you will. So regardless of the nationality, you can actually talk to La Piste. If your question is, okay, what happens I mean, in terms of procedure, what can you do? Well, you can actually contact your consulate or embassy, and you can actually, police also does not differentiate between a Canadian and not Canadian. If you want to file a police report, they're going to take the report for you and going to take it's going to take its procedure, but you can actually seek help also from your embassy if they can help you, or call us at La Piste, and you're kind of like in our services too, so we can actually help you with that. Okay, what about other alternatives to legal remedies? What I was talking about is not everybody who wants to go to war want to go through the process. Well, there are other alternatives. I'm sorry, like meeting with the employer to discuss the issue. Sometimes we have meetings at 3, and La Piste can actually join. As I said, there's reasonable accommodations in the workplace that can take place. For example, okay, I'm going to switch that person from this department to another, or I'm going to actually give a certain a sanction to the person not to do that, or a verbal or written warning to the person. So there are reasonable accommodations in the workplace that can be taken by the employer or by the institution to actually stop this. Mediation with the aggressor or the harasser. Sometimes people can go into mediation, and then they can ask for certain compensations, and a certain agreement is drafted and signed by the people instead of going to the judicial process. There's restorative justice system as well, which is something that we've been listening, which is like going into rehabilitation and remedies, and people talking to each other about alternative methods, about, okay, how can we help rehabilitate? How can that person, for example, the aggressive, receive therapy actually to help that person? How can he understand, he or she, how they can understand that they caused harm to the other person, and how that other person can get closure? The victim can get closure regarding the situation. There's also psychosocial intervention, which is by active listening, or actually what works a lot is group therapy or individual therapy as well. And as I said, at La Piste, we have resources for that too. Some organizations that actually work in the market for the psychosocial, in the psychosocial realm, we actually have some of the most popular ones. I mean, we have the crime victims, actually the crime victims assistance, the CAVAC, Crime Victims Assistance Center, which is a very good, full-rounded center that can help in giving advice and giving you resources on how to find your psychosocial help, or even refer you to what are the legal steps to actually go into filing a police report. There is also another very, very good group that is called the Groupe d'aide et d'information de harcèlement. Groupe d'aide et d'information en harcèlement sexuel au travail. It's the GAST. It's actually a group for help and information on sexual harassment in the workplace. They also do accompanying. It doesn't have to be in the art community. They actually do it for everybody across Quebec, and they also do some accompanying in the mediation sessions, or to draft some complaints that you want to file to the Commission des Normes or to the Human and Youth Rights Commission. So they actually accompany that. And although their name is actually for sexual harassment in the workplace, it also includes psychological harassment, and they're very, very helpful. Another very good resource in the market is what we call the RQ-CALAX. So the RQ-CALAX is the Regroupement Québécois des Centres d'aide et de lutte contre les agressions à caractère sexuel. So in English, it's the organization grouping sexual assault help centers in Quebec. This is a feminist group, so they serve actually women. They do not serve men, so they serve women within actually also sending them to resources or providing them with psychological or psychosocial help, and they are very well networked as well, so they can actually, all these people work in consultation together. All these groups, they work with La Piste. We do roundtables, we actually exchange notes, we assist each other in each other's workshops so that we know what's happening, and then we sometimes there are events that group all these people together in order to be able to actually guide the person who calls any of these organizations to be able to guide them through the other ones. So we receive calls from the GAST, and the CAVAC receives calls, people, we refer people to them, etc. What can La Parte offer? Actually, La Parte, as I said, we offer legal consultations. There is no obligation from your side. It's free of charge, it's independent, and it's very confidential. What we do is that we take your call, we know the story, we analyze some documents if you have some documents to send to us. If you want to prepare a claim to the Commission des Normes or the EVAC, the Compensation Act, or the SAQ, because there has been a claim that you want to do there, we actually help you do that. We have experience in that field, and we can help you draft it, we can help you file it, we can help you with the statute of limitation. We accompany the resources of the art community, so we accompany also in criminal processes just to be sure that, you know, like you're there. We can accompany in also filing the police report. Some people say that, you know, like they are not taking seriously enough, and then it affects them. So we actually go and we give reinforcement, or we assist in meetings. And we give this service, it's a bilingual service, so anybody can talk to us about it. As I said, it's independent. There's no obligation. Nobody knows. So your employer or the other contractual party won't know. Your association won't know. Anybody actually wouldn't know unless there is a group of person and you actually give us written authorization to go through the group and you know, share your information, because some groups want to just be together and they want to know, okay, well, what's going on? How can we proceed? Maybe we can proceed collectively, and it gives certain force to the file instead of working individually. So we actually have centralized information with us where we do have, for example, the name of the harasser that has been repeated in different stories, and we actually can put people together only after taking their a written consent for that, and knowing that we can share and what information we can share, because sometimes people come to us with several files. So there is, for example, with that harasser, but a few years before, there's another incident that happened, and maybe they don't want to share that particular old incident with the rest of the group. So we actually take care of that too. The person receives what we say a made to measure opinion. It's a concrete opinion on their specific case. Every case is different than the other, even if it's from the same harasser. What happened in this story is different than what happened in the other story. The consent is different. The person is different. The age of the person is different. So the person can have a quick access to the lawyers through La Parte. This is our information. So this is our website. You can go to our website, and we have a contact request in it. So you can send us an email with your information, and we can get in touch with you. This is our phone number. You can call us anytime, Monday to Friday from 10 to 6 p.m. And we can 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. and we can actually, of course, we have a huge volume these days. Well, in normal times, we answer within 24 hours. We try our best with all the wave that is going on to be there for a lot of people. So we've actually asked Juripop for reinforcement of other people to help us in order to be there, to be on time to actually answer people and be able to help them. So this is for our presentation for the purposes of today. And so if you guys have any questions, I'm gonna look if there are other questions that came in that I can answer.
I don't think there's any question for the moment.
There's no more questions?
No more. But we do have about, I don't know, we have at least 10 minutes to answer more questions. If people have questions,
absolutely,
they can write them. In the meantime, I do have a question.
Yes, absolutely.
As I understand, I think your services are more for people based in Quebec. So are you aware of any other services similar to that elsewhere in Canada? Because we are a national alliance, so there might be people listening from other provinces at the moment, or any resources that they can find online or anything else like that?
Well, actually, I mean, I haven't heard of something like La Parte per se, like something like a one-stop shop. However, what I do is sometimes when people call us, whether they're not within the cultural center or we're referring to psychosocial or other resources, I actually know that some universities, because, you know, there's a certain wave that happened with universities too, like around 2 years ago, and everybody like made a one-stop shop actually in universities. Some universities make their services available to the public. So the person, I think, the answer would be like to check on the internet to see. I'm personally not aware of something like La Partie. We personally don't have alliances, for example, in other provinces, but I'm sure they, especially with what's going on in the country right now, I'm sure that there has been, and what has happened 2017, I'm sure that there has been, you know, like some kind of accommodation, let's say, to help people within the community.
Great. Well, I guess it's probably going to be our job to look for things. And we have already started a web page on our website to gather some information about where to find information if you want to know more about harassment and things like that. So we will look for maybe resources outside of Quebec and maybe internationally as well, because, well, at the moment with COVID is a little bit different, but usually our sector travels a lot around the world. So if things happen elsewhere, they need to know where to refer to, apart from obviously the consulate, as you said.
It is very important, because most people who come, they kind of like, they don't know from where to start, you know. And so to find, you know, like a place that can guide them, you know, on, listen, this is the situation, this is what you can do, and then people feel more empowered afterwards. So I totally understand when people come in. Sometimes people, they come in from a specific institution, they have a policy against harassment, but still the policy is so vague that they really don't know where, how, when, or where to file the complaint. So yeah, so having this kind of service is very important, and it's very empowering too. I mean, when people call us at the beginning of the phone call, and then till the time they hang up, they're a different person. You know, when they have the information is key. When they have the information, they know that they're not alone, that they have rights, and they can go further with it. Even if they don't go further, it's really empowering.
Yeah, I'm sure. There's one more question that came in about age of consent and minors. So I don't know if you want to read it out and answer.
Sure, absolutely. Let me just go through it. I don't know why I am unable to.
I can read it out if you want.
Yeah, if you can.
Yeah. So for Quebec, Canada, can people have clarification of what the age of consent is, how that changes for under 18s with a coach or teacher or other authority figure? And do enterprises, educational institutions have mandatory reporting requirements for sexual harassment, or is it only if the age of consent is violated?
Very good question. Because of the minors, there is a misconception of being a minor, and it used to be 18, but it has been actually reduced to 16. So the age of consent. So if you're 16 or below, your consent, you cannot give consent for having a sexual act with an adult. So actually the age is 16, and that's across Canada because it's in the criminal code. There's also a lot of things to take into account as the age difference of people. So for example, I know that you're talking about a teacher, I'll get that to you right away, but like, for example, if it's two minors, we have to take into account, you know, like the age difference between them, and there are a lot of factors that come in. However, with a teacher, so obviously the teacher is an adult and the student is a minor. So I assume in this case that even if the minor gave consent or didn't give consent at all, that it doesn't count. I mean, it doesn't count if they gave consent. It doesn't count as consent because they are a minor. And if they didn't give consent at all, and the person and the adult says, oh, well, I thought she was or he was okay with that. Well, that doesn't count either. What he says regarding that doesn't count either, because the minor doesn't have the clarity of mind to give consent in this kind of situation. So, and that's actually across the board. It's throughout Canada. So I feel that there's also a sense of, you know, like, what kind of obligation do I have if I witness that, you know, like if I witness for a minor, it's important to go to the police and say that, because there's a lot for people who, adults who are having actually, who are committing assaults or criminal acts to minor, it's really, it has an extended actually impact, where actually the person can actually have, the aggressor can have certain statements from the court where he cannot be in areas where minors are, and it's very, very developed, and it's very serious. So to report to the police would be one thing. If you're a witness and you want to know, okay, what to do and what is the situation in terms of emergencies and everything, they can give us a call and we can guide them through what to do.
And companies or schools, do they have to report? For example, if you go to your HR department and you complain about something that's taken place in the workplace, do the companies have a requirement to report the sexual harassment?
Well, normally if people like witness this regarding minors, yes, they have to report it, because otherwise they'd be contributing to, you know, this being an effect into other minors, and it kind of ruins people's lives. And, you know, like for minors, this can have a deep impact. For actually anybody, it could have an impact. So imagine for minors. So some schools have that awareness of, you know, like getting the parent, for example, in and talking to the parent, talking about this to the parent, or actually reporting to the police, or actually stopping the teacher right away, suspending the teacher right away until they investigate and see, because they have to take the allegations seriously. They cannot just say, oh, it's maybe just because they're scared of their grades and they're just accusing. They have to take it seriously. They have to go further. They have to go check the information, because the repercussions are actually very, very serious.
Yeah. Yes, of course. I think there is another question. We're approaching to the end, so if there is one more burning question, maybe put it right now on the board.
Otherwise, just call. Just give me.
Otherwise, yes, exactly. You can always call La Piste at any time. But when a company knows about assault on a minor but hides it, are there any repercussions for that?
Well, actually, yes. There might be a civil lawsuit afterwards to that. There might be also, if the school or the employer or whatever is an accomplice. There might be also criminal repercussions for that. You know, they hide it. They do that to conceal. Well, that is dangerous. That would be a criminal, actually can be a criminal act against them, a criminal accusation. Also, later on, that minor or the people who are handling the matters of the minor, whether, you know, like their parents or their legal guardians or whatever, they can file a lawsuit for whatever damage happened to that minor. And when we're talking about damage, it's not just physical damage, it's also emotional damage that they can actually go and get from the court. So actually the bill can be pretty salty against people who hide that.
I guess there's a fine line between allegations and accusations, and I guess it's going through the process, but you can't hide it once the person has been accused. Is that correct?
Well, actually, you know, to reach the accusation it's really a term that is used in courts, and that can be determined within the court. But allegations have to be taken seriously, because it all starts with allegations, right? The person is innocent until proven otherwise. That's how the system is built. However, well, we have to use the allegation as a starting point. And unfortunately, some people, schools or employers, they just actually minimize the situation. Just, you know, they either conceal or they're just negligent or reckless with, oh, this is just, you know, like this is just a woman thing, or this is just, you know, a man thing. And they put a label on it and they stereotype, for example. But it has to be taken seriously in terms of there has to be an investigation, there has to be a managing system for the complaint to go further and see whether it is where the truth is, and not minimize and not look at, you know, like past history of people, because some people say, oh, well, they filed a complaint before, we're not going to take this one seriously. This one might be a serious one, and there might be repercussions for that.
Sure. Well, we don't have any more burning questions. So thank you so much, Nadia, for being with us. It's been very, very informative, I think, for many people. And of course, even though there's always some gray areas, and I guess that's where you come handy, because people can just pick up the phone or send you an email and they'll get an answer to their questions. So yes, maybe just before we leave, I just want to tell you that this has been recorded, so we will put it on our website, so you'll be able to watch it again. You'll be able to also see the PowerPoint presentation, which we're going to put on our website. So you're going to have some answers to your questions there to use it as a refresher. And well, Piste is really concerned with this matter, and this isn't going to be the last opportunity for people to ask questions. As I said, we're going to build a web page for Ressources, but we might even organize other events similar to that, so that we can get the word out and demystify all of this, and give some information to our community. So thank you so much, Nadia, and thank you everyone for being here and for listening.
Thank you.